Hey, what's going on, folks? Happy Juneteenth. We're here to talk boxing history once again. It is the 19th of June, 2024. And as you saw in the title, we're going to be talking two of the greatest fighters to ever lace up a pair of gloves. And I'm sure they could do it without the gloves as well. None other than the great Harry Greb, the Pittsburgh Windmill, and Sam Langford, the Boston Bone Crusher. So if you don't know them, you're about to find out a little something about them. But let's be honest, if you're in the history, you know them. And what better guest to have than none other than Random Acoustic Thoughts himself here, who will be joining us for this monumentous live right here of the GOATs of boxing right there. So appreciate your Random Acoustic Thoughts. How's it going on? How's it going, buddy?
Oh, everything's good, man. How you doing?
Hey, I'm hanging in there, man. You know, I had to give you that call just given the fact that, hey, we're going to be talking Sam Langford and
Oh,
can't
yeah,
do
you
this on
speak
my
my
own
language.
right
I
here.
got, yeah, I saw. I was like, oh, okay, I can't miss this. I literally cannot.
And see Sam Langford in the graphic there for Random. So, yeah, we appreciate everyone dropping in. This should be a fun one. We're going to kind of take a look at things that are tied to both fighters, some parallels. Both of them have massive resumes, massive records, and also both of them are very polarizing in the sport. And many you will see and hear regard them as the two greatest fighters that the sport has seen. So, we're certainly happy about that. Real quick before we dive into it, shout out to those in the chat, those that will be listening. Happy Juneteenth there from Cirilla Side Dillas. Appreciate you there, buddy. Thank you for dropping by. Sends his regards right here. Always great to have you in here, my friend. So we're gonna talk a little bit of Langford Greb, and we did get the question there earlier. You had Greb, Lewis, Wills, and some other stuff there at Cirillas Ideala. So looking forward to that. Shout out to Dan in the building here. Dan, bringing that knowledge. Appreciate you dropping by, Dan, as always. Always good to have you. And I'm sure you'll provide some great insight. Beagle 47, always great to have you as well there, buddy. Appreciate you dropping in. It's at about 15 minutes before back to work, but checking in. Well, we appreciate you checking in. As always, there, Beagle, you know, have great discussions, enjoy the comments, all that good stuff. So thank you there, buddy. Dan mentions, wow, more Langford, can't get enough of Langford on YouTube these days. No doubt. We need the history for sure. And that is something that we are going to try and continue to bring you all history in boxing. We got a lot of the modern stuff, so we're going to bring you history. Shout out to the Titan, or Trey Titan, my bad. Trey Titan 176 in the building. Says salute there to you, Trey. Keeping it 100. We don't try to do that today here too, for sure. So appreciate you dropping by, Trey. Yeah, as always. Yeah, been a minute. I've seen you before here, Trey. So always good to have you in the mix here. No doubt about it. So Cirilla says Langford era deserves as much attention as Dempsey, Lewis, Ali, Mike Tyson's era. No doubt about it. That is one true statement right there. Your Johnson Dempsey video was epic. Oh, thanks there, buddy. Yeah. That was a good one right there. Hey, good to have that with Random Acoustic Thoughts. And then Trey says Langford was the truth. His rivalry with Jack Johnson is completely overlooked. No doubt about it. And I know one man that knows about that is indeed Random Acoustic Thoughts. But just thinking about that, Random, and of course, we'll get to that piece of things. Johnson Langford. And of course, we're going to tie Harry Greb into the mix because he was in and around there. But as it relates to Sam Langford, Random, I wanted to get your thoughts on just the early part of his career and what made him start to shine as one of those guys who was going to be a real threat to everyone in the sport of boxing, not just in the lower weights where he started, but heavyweight as well. Kind of when did we start to see that side of Sam Langford?
So he debuted as amateur and got kicked out of the amateurs, which we call his pro debut, all in 1902. By 1905, this was like the season after Barbados Walcott, the welterweight champ, shot himself through the hand. Walcott teased a return in 06, but he actually came back in 05, but in 06 he actually came back. So like in 05, Langford was being avoided by some of the welters, and the ones he was fighting, it wasn't Walcott because he wasn't back yet. And so he was basically started issuing an open weight challenge in 05, the same year Jeffries retired. And so at that point, and then at the end of the year, Christmas Day, he fought Joe Jeanette, the first fight with the great Joe Jeanette, which he lost. But the following season, 1906, he avenged that loss, and then a few weeks later fought Jack Johnson, great Jack Johnson, and gave up a lot of pounds to both guys. Gave up more pounds to Johnson, but that was sort of the beginning of him being a factor. But in 05, when he was issuing the challenge, it wasn't fully taken as a novelty, but it was part novelty. But it was part of the tradition of avoided boxers trying to get matches. If you have a big name, you can give up size. Guys have done it. Some of his rivals did it. Young Peter Jackson, Larry Temple, they also gave up size to get matches. Joe Gans. But you mentioned, when did he become an international threat to everybody? Well, his breakout fight was the win over Joe Gans in December of 1903 at lightweight, or the lightweight champion at catchweight at 140. I'm not sure about Greb, though. Big up, Rodolfo. I'm not sure what Greb's breakout fight would be considered. I don't know enough about the man, like the specifics of it, the nuts and bolts of his rise.
Yeah, good stuff there, Random. No, great. Appreciate what you shared there. Greb, that's an interesting question right there. I had to look up his record to kind of get insight, but I want to think that it was probably around the time he fought and gave him everything he could handle, gave everything he could handle to the fighter out of Minnesota. He died of Bright's disease. I got to find his name now. Minnesota. What is his name? I can't think of his name here.
Misk?
Yes, Billy Misk. Billy Misk is what I'm trying to think of. You're right. Spot on there. I believe I'm thinking correctly.
So maybe their first battle. See, I don't know.
Yeah, the great Billy Misk right here. Let me double check here. When was that? So that was actually, that's 1918 is when they first fought there. Or no. It was actually.
Yeah, he was already tearing it up by then. He was already, because I'm pretty sure his 1916 and 17 were pretty spectacular.
Yeah, it was 1915 when they first actually fought, ended up being a draw. So this was January 12th, 1915. And Harry Greb at the time came in at 22-3-4. So we're talking to Greb early on. And he ran into a Billy Misk at that time, who had more experience than him. We know Billy Misk would go on to fight at heavyweight as well. And Greb basically came into that contest and showed the type of fighter he was and what he was capable of as well in that contest. So there could have been some things there early on, but thinking about it, Greb, I believe, started around 1913. So if you talk about it from the standpoint of where he ended up there, some 2 years later.
That's a pretty fast rise.
Yeah, that's pretty fast
rise. And you said he was 22-3-4?
22-3-4.
So he was a little bit less than 1/10 into his incredible career, and he was already 22-3-4. Put that in perspective. If he was 22-3-4 today, you might think he'd been fighting 6 or 7 years at least.
Right. And it's insane. And Billy Misk, he already had a ton of experience on Greb at that time, but it didn't matter because Greb was able to jump in there, do his sting for sure. So I would say that is probably one of the breakout points there for Greb, where you started to take notice for him. And then, of course, he would go years being one of the top contenders there in the world, but he would be ducked by some, most famously Johnny Wilson being the guy who held the middleweight title for a period, and Greb was the number one contender, the guy who should have gotten a shot, and that never happened. But I would say, probably taking Misk, that was when the early onset of what we started to see there with Harry Greb to draw with such an experienced fighter there at that particular time. And then the rest was history in some sense. And I think that's where, in thinking about this video and some of the parallels, no different than how early on Sam Langford was one of those guys who was in with a number of top flight fighters very early in his career. You mentioned the fact that of course he was in there with Johnson and all of that, but just think about one of them that stands out to me there, Rednam, is Sam Langford being at such a young age and taking on Joe Gans, who was basically the world lightweight champion at the time and was unquestionably one of the best boxers in the world. And then you have Langford go in and be able to do what he was able to do with a guy like Joe Gans. I want to get your thoughts on that one too, because that's big time.
Yeah, that was an upset. And Gans at certain times, certain fighters piled in fights. They either booked up ahead, book like a busy 3 weeks with maybe 3 or 4 fights in it, or they'd add fights. They went along. The Gans Langford bout, it had already been talked about, but it came together very quickly. From what it appears, from what I seem to have seen, is they got, the public got about a week's notice. I saw in one of the Boston newspapers, they said, looks like Criterion is matching Joe Gans with Sam Langford. That was on a Tuesday, and it was about a week out from the actual bout at the premier club of the time of that year in Boston. And which might partly explain the weight agreement. But Gans already had a fight with Dave Holly, a 6-rounder in Philly. We've talked about that 86 in Philly at the time. It was if both men were standing, there's no official decisions. You get newspaper decisions. 6-round bouts, and a lot of guys fought a bunch of them. Dave Holly was one of those guys. So Gans actually was already booked, and so he added on a title fight the day after he was going to fight one of the best lightweights, especially in that busy Philly scene, but in general, one of the best lightweights. Dave Holly was legit and very experienced.
Oh, yeah.
Very quickly. Like, he'd only been fighting since January 1900, but Holly already had a ton of fights by 1903. He got it in, just like Gans did himself, except Gans had been going a decade, so Gans was deep in the streets already, and he would go on, by 1907, they were widely hailed as the greatest lightweight of all times. Joe Gans was something else. Once he cleared up the disputes, because there was like battling Nelson, Jimmy Britt, and other guys, there are other claims, things going on, but by 1907, Joe Gans sort of cleared that up. In 08, he lost his title to Nelson, but he got his full due in 1907. They couldn't believe how good he was once he resolved all the competing claims. It gets, just like today, it's different politics because it's not always a sanctioning body. Sometimes it's just a guy with money behind him making a claim, beating top fighters. And it gets resolved quite often. So Gans was able to do that. Langford, unfortunately, as you know, he didn't really get to resolve any sort of title claim. He did get the one shot against Joe Walcott at welterweight in 04, which went to a draw, but that was, other than the colored titles, he didn't get a shot at the quote unquote world title, but the white claimants after that. But Greb, he got avoided too. Avoiding fighters, maybe the excuse is different, or maybe there's a different way it gets handled, but plenty of guys didn't want any part of Harry Greb, even though it seems like he fought literally everybody. Came pretty close, but it's hard to get a match. He wanted to fight with Dempsey just as bad as Langford wanted to fight with Johnson.
Oh yeah, certainly. That's one of the parallels there. Real quick, shout out to Rodolfo Rivera Jr. in the building, of course. Shout out to my man Blake Gallimore in the building. Blake, good to see you there, buddy, as well. Yeah, been a while. Blake says in 1919, Harry Greb had beaten 16 top 10 contenders from heavyweight to middleweight multiple times. Who's ever done this? And of course, this was during his famed 45-0 year. Yes, indeed, right there. Indeed, that is Blake Gallimore. And Dan says, don't forget Greb was a welterweight first. Yes, certainly. So, yeah, great points made right there. Yeah, I mean, that 1919, probably one of the most standout years that the sport has seen, period. when you take into account what Harry Greb was able to do that year. And then especially knowing that he even went on into 1902 or 1920, that is, rather, to start things out 7-0, 7-0 before taking a draw. I believe it was a draw. It might have been the one with uh, the Gibbons brother, Tommy Gibbons. So that just speaks volumes to just how good Greb was at that particular stage. But these two guys certainly had some parallels. Both of them fought with a chip on their shoulder, giving you everything they had in every fight. It's almost like that Jordan effect. I was recently watching The Last Dance of Michael Jordan and how he gave it to you. It gave you everything, every fight, and that certainly reminds me of these two type of fighters right here in Greb and Langford. Just the amount of fights that they had, and then just the level in which they were fighting. It was always a matter of putting on a show, and they thrived
MJ was
with the
special,
competition.
and MJ was hyper competitive. He didn't have to do what Langford did, which Langford sometimes had to carry opponents, or chose to carry opponents so that they could fight again in the next town. If it wasn't close, the club's not going to want to see a slaughter. They actually would criticize uneven fights. Like, they would say it was so one-sided, it was uninteresting, even if you got the win convincingly. So they wanted it. But yeah, Langford was a guy like Jordan, like MJ. Don't motivate him. Kid Norfolk did that, and I think it was 17, saying Langford was no longer at the top. Basically saying he was old news. And B League, Langford just beat the pants off him and then called him B League in the papers. Like, he's not on my level. Like, don't motivate certain guys. And Jordan was like that. He was already hyper competitive, but don't give him a reason to really put in his like A+ game, because it's going to be ugly. And it's plenty of great stories on YouTube of basketball players talking about don't egg Jordan on. Like, if you're playing him, don't disrespect him and stuff. He takes it personally, but there's a result in the performance. I'm sure Greb, when he had a point to prove as well, was just vicious with it. Certainly Langford was. And he fought the full spectrum of going real easy with guys, nice little friendly go, all the way to like a career-changing beating like Langford gave Gunboat Smith in 1914.
Yeah, and what's his name? Fireman Jim Flynn found that out as well.
Yeah, Flynn was talking a lot of smack. What he did in general, but heading into their first fight in 1908, because Flynn had already fought a lot of serious dudes, and Langford just wiped him out in about a little bit under half a round, and it was ugly. Like, knocked him insensible, But later, Flynn actually, years later, 17, I saw the papers were crediting Flynn's knockout over Jack Dempsey with the fast, like the technique. Flynn was always a fast starter, but the actual technique he used, the trick he used to knock out Dempsey, that he picked up from fighting Sam Langford. So the skills translated out, and these tough guys would do that. That was like probably Flynn's greatest win, or one of them, certainly. He had some good wins. That first fight, Flynn, and the second fight he did really well. And then the third fight, which was booked for 45 rounds, Langford put it on him. We actually have that third fight on film.
Oh yeah, and that's great to have film of both of these guys, and I think that is a treat in itself. You expect more. You would expect more from each of them. You're talking 300 plus fights. You're talking 600, 700 plus fights in between them. If you factor in, who knows, well beyond that, just thinking about how often these guys fought and the types of fighters they were. So we don't have much film. Of course, with Greb, we only have the workout reel, the promo reel for him. But Langford, we have Bill Lang. We have that fight. We also have the Joe Jeanette fight, Fireman Jim Flynn. So that's three of them for sure. And then, of course, we have some training footage and things of that nature. I think those are probably the three fights that I recall there. Random, I'm sure you would know. Okay.
The first fight was Sam McVeigh, which was the next big fight he had after he had that Bill Lang fight in 1911. That was filmed. I've seen them that they were showing the pictures, moving pictures. With Langford was sometimes there talking talking over it, as was the case. But I haven't seen anything about it surviving since. But that
Yeah.
was promoted by the same guy who filmed the Bill Lang fight, Hugh McIntosh, the Australian promoter who had put together Jack Johnson and Tommy Burns. So Hugh McIntosh, shout out to him. He actually unified the heavyweight title. He was the guy who got it done. You couldn't really say there was a truly undisputed heavyweight champ in the gloved era until you get to Jack Johnson, 1908. Hugh McIntosh made it happen.
Yeah, hey, that's big time. Yeah, Australian right there making it happen. And one of the things that I've said, I know you know this, Random. Others on here know this. We talked about it then, etc. Is during those periods back then, and even before that, but certainly during that period. I mean, if you were the top level heavyweight and you were trying to prove yourself, Australia was sort of that stomping ground right there, because that's where the real top level heavyweight fights were happening. You would have some that would take place in France as well, but just thinking about Australia, you had the likes of Langford down there. We know that's where the title exchanged as far as Burns and Johnson. But I mean, just think about the monumentous role it played in the sport during that period. And we know that more of those fights were filmed down there, as you mentioned there, Random, which is the kind of crazy part, kind of plays with your mind. You know that McIntosh filmed more of those contests, it's just that we don't have them, at least right now.
And he was promoting, so he opened the Olympia Club in the UK. So that was like, for a time, there was a rival club to the National Sporting Club where Langford had already competed twice. He actually, I can't remember if one of his fights in England was at a different club, but he performed multiple times successfully in front of the National Sporting Club. Well, McIntosh opened the Olympia Club. He wanted to like pad the ring to prevent the danger of people hurting themselves, falling over, cracking their head, which was a real concern. And he instituted 6-ounce gloves instead of the 4-ounce of the National Sporting Club. But he filmed the Bill Lang fight in 1911. Then he filmed the Langford's fight, opening up a new club with Sam McVeigh for McIntosh in Paris. So certain guys, certain places, you were more likely to end up with film. Like the Joe Jeanette fight with Sam Langford, the only like Hall of Fame fight that survived his, that was in Paris. We're lucky to have that, even though it's 10 fights into the rivalry, but you get what you get. You know what I mean? We're just lucky anything survived. Because I'd love to see those first two fights, the TKO loss where he retirement in Christmas 1905, and then the rematch in, what was it, April of 1906?
Okay. Yeah.
I think they fought Jeanette then and Johnson both in April of 06. If I'm not really looking at notes here, I'm just winging it. But
yeah,
I'd love to see those fights, but they weren't filmed, so it's tough luck. You don't get nothing much. So we're lucky we got to see Langford in the very clean, no clinching, no holding and hitting, clean breaks rules of the National Sporting Club fighting Lang. And then we get footage of him fighting a hyper aggressive, clinchy, headbutty, shoulder popping, real battler like Jim Flynn in the fight, the 45 rounder that went to the 8th. And then we also get one of his, part of the rivalry with Jeanette in what was actually a fantastic fight.
Yeah. You remember what year that one was? Because I know it was deep into the rivalry, right?
Yeah, that was 13, the end of 13, 1913.
Okay, so yeah.
It was the end of a season where he'd come back from Australia, and people with certain fights that year, he was a little heavy, and he had lost to Gunboat Smith on points, and that was, some people were saying he was out of condition. Gunboat's people weren't. They were saying, yeah, he whooped him, but Langford was trying to give Gunboat full credit. But anyway, they rematched the next year and he put it all over him. But in 13, there were some small questions about him, his conditioning, following his extended fight trip to Australia. So, but the Jeanette fight that closed out the season was like a fantastic fight. So we're lucky we got one of the good ones. These long series, some of the fights weren't all that great. And so even if they had been filmed, we lucked out that we at least got one of his classic battles, highlights from it.
No, yeah, that's big time to have that. And we think about some of the classic fights that we don't have, that we just have the stories of. Thankfully, they did a great job of accounting for these fights back during that period. So I think that speaks volumes itself. I pulled up a graphic on the screen of Sam Langford's record. Of course, this is the box rec record, and I took into account the no decisions that are listed there with 60 of them. But surely a guy like Sam Langford had more fights, more contests that were taking place. As a matter of fact, I know Random Acoustic Thoughts himself actually found an unreported Langford fight that took place in the early part of the 1900s there, or the early part of the 19s, or well, not even
Yeah,
the
it's
teens.
1903. Yeah, I just only found the one so far.
Yeah.
I feel like it might be later in his career where there was some, well, probably spread out, but like later in his career, there was a part where he wasn't always getting the same coverage, but he was squeezing in a lot of work,
Mm-hmm.
trying for comeback. There may be some there, but it's hard to say exactly. I mean, the one that I found was listed in the Revere Journal and the Boston Post, so it wasn't like off the radar, it just hadn't been dug up yet. Which we get
Yep.
that as more and more newspaper pages are scanned in, and the search technology from the websites, from the newspaper archive websites gets better. There's more stuff that can be found. So that's all I'm doing. I'm just going through finding stuff that if someone else looked, they would eventually find it too if they're methodical. But as
Yeah.
you know,
We appreciate
86,
your work there.
this is a hobby kind of endeavor. You know, there's no money in it, so I'm just doing it when I have time in between work.
Well, yeah,
Same
your
as
work
all
is
of this.
appreciated. I mean, just think of what you were able to do there, just in the period that you have been doing this. And hey, there's more to come, I'd imagine.
Yeah. I found out so much that I wasn't aware of. That just didn't seem to be out there. Like with the Joe Gans fight, they were supposed to fight the year after. After Langford beat him in '03, they were supposed to rematch in 1904. The fight got called off, but that isn't something I'd seen anywhere until I saw it in the papers. I was like, oh, look at this.
Oh yeah,
And, and
yeah.
instead, Gans fought young Griffo, who was someone else that Langford had fought.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Got
Young
subbed
Griffo.
in because he was gonna be heavy again. It was again 138 ringside, but came in at 140. He was gonna come in at 140 with a few days ahead, and when his manager Joe Woodman let Gans manager Hereford know, then they called the fight off and fought an easier fighter.
Yeah, yeah,
But Gans would, Langford was scary, so even then,
yeah.
and so Gans would only fight him at 138 ringside.
Oh yeah.
Whereas that same season in '04, the same year that he called off the Langford fight, he fought the great Barbados Walcott at 142. So
Interesting.
he
And
would fight the
Walcott,
great Joe Walcott at 142, but he wouldn't fight Langford at 140.
we
Had to be
knew
130.
we knew how strong Walcott was. Short in stature, but stocky and strong. So yeah, that tells you something right there, because Walcott himself was a handful, but he definitely didn't want to go that route with Langford.
Yeah, Walcott was scary, but Langford was already a great jabber. He had a great lead hand, and he could crack with both hands. But he had a great jab very early in his career. He was already being praised for his skills. It wasn't just about being tough. He proved his toughness, but it wasn't just about that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and he had already fought some guys that would test him, guys of local reputation or a former national reputation. And so, like, he came through the fires for a late stoppage win against Patsy Sweeney. That got him a lot of respect. Patsy Sweeney was one of the top guys some seasons
Oh yeah.
earlier, and still commanded some respect, had some followers who believed in him.
So yeah, Patsy got around, no doubt about it. Real quick, random, I want to mention that shout out to Max Duran who dropped in, says, "What's up? Appreciate you there, Max.
What's
Always
up,
great
man?
to have you here, buddy. Always good to have you here. Your comments and everything, so it is appreciated." Blake Gallimore mentions that Langford and Greb's careers are a lot alike, both avoided, both denied, both ducked by the heavyweight champion, and both the best of their time. A real shame the two didn't meet up. Yeah, that's crazy. That was potentially possible there, random, of course. Potentially possible, just given the, but you look at the parallels and all of that stuff, and but Langford was more so competing at heavyweight more full time than, of course, Greb. He was still at middleweight operating that capacity, then would eventually do light heavyweight, and we know he fought at heavyweight as well. So there was some potential for that, but actually happening, though I don't know if there were ever any real discussions or anything of that nature.
Yeah, I saw one. I think it was in the late teens or the early 20s, but when Langford was fighting in sort of the Midwest, the South, and then or the Midwest, and there was talk that Greb would be in town for something or other, and that they were going to try to be matched. But there was a big fight up in, I believe, New York at the time. One of the Gibbons brothers and someone were fighting that had title shot implications, and Greb was up there for that. So
Yeah.
they were never in close enough proximity, at least at that time. They weren't. I know they fought on the same card one time. So there was a time when they were both competing. When Langford was closer to his prime, it wouldn't have been, that was at a time when no one Langford's size was fighting. Like, he was full fighting at heavyweight, even though he was very small for the class. He was basically like a light heavyweight with a little bit of a belly. So like 180-ish, 185, in that sort of range, like not in like super crunchy, but he's not like rotund. And
Yeah.
he was too much of a vicious puncher and too experienced for a lot of the smaller guys. But by the time of Greb's career, when he was moving up and willing to fight heavyweight, Langford was well past it, but still very dangerous. Would have been a good fight even then. I think Greb would have been able to get it on points and stay away, because of his abilities and his mobility at that point in his career. This isn't like the mid-20s Greb where he's lost some of his mobility. He would have been dancing, but it could have potentially have happened. But yeah, the power differential was remarkable. But at the time when they would have been in proximity, maybe they could have fought. The speed of Greb was just some whole other level. I think he would have outworked him at that point. But that's also, you're talking about Greb in his prime versus Langford with only having sight in one eye. He's not doesn't have the legs he used to have.
Yeah, you're right there, Random. It would have been sort of like thunder versus lightning in some sense. You have the Sam Langford. I pulled up his record there in terms of, this is what, as mentioned, BoxRec. Now, 178 wins, with 156 of those being via knockout, 30 losses, 38 draws, 60 no decisions, 8 no contests. I mean, you're talking about just remarkable with that 156 knockouts. And as mentioned, this guy was legitimately knocking out heavyweights, having come from such a low weight himself, or just under like lightweight, close to the featherweight range, right, or something like that. Or random, as far as when he started out, surely I know he was as low as around that lightweight range.
Yeah, and in the amateurs, he was fighting in the 135 class. Pros 133 at that time, but I don't know how big he actually was. He may not have been big for the class at all. I mean, and that same year, the next year in 03, he was the lightweight, but he also fought a couple guys at welter.
Yeah,
but yeah, exactly. So he might have been featherweight sized. I haven't seen him actually booked at featherweight, but he may well have been small enough to be in that class.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. Just given what we know he would go on to be. And then I bring up Harry Greb there, 108 wins, 49 via knockout, 9 losses, 3 draws, 179 no decisions. That's insane. 1 no contest. But man, you're talking about both of these guys, 300 plus fights here. And Greb, one of those guys who's a speed demon, would bounce in and out, all over the place with his punches. Hard guy to pin down, and just a tough individual for these fighters to deal with for multiple rounds. and especially prolonged fights. Is just he's not the type of guy that you wanted to just deal with for the duration of that time. And he knew the tricks of the trade as well in terms of how he operated from a boxing standpoint and his craftiness as well. So that's what made him pretty special as well. So he could get the job done when he needed to, in terms of he could get some individuals out, but certainly that was not his drawing card right there, especially relative to the amount of fights that he had. But man, Harry Greb, I mean, not afraid to go in there, much like Langford, with anyone, regardless of the size or whatnot, and just a daring type of fighter, you know.
Yeah, he was, and a well-trained one. You know, you can see in that training footage where he's at Jack O'Brien's gym, the great Philadelphia Jack O'Brien. You can see O'Brien's an older guy there, but he's like still crunchy in the tank top. And
Oh yeah.
Jack O'Brien was a serious technician. He was a volume fighter at times in his career. When the tactics, he was an intelligent fighter, so when the tactics called for it. Oh, what's up, Ross? So yeah, I mean, Greb and Langford both had excellent training, and you know, Langford at times he had either lost motivation or just been using himself a bit too freely, and would come in out of shape more than like someone like Greb. Greb stayed pretty crunchy. He was, you know, barring injury, he was. There were times in Langford's career where he was coming in heavy, but he was still fighting a busy schedule. He was still, even his slow years are busy compared to today. Like his 1912 wasn't as busy as the surrounding years, but he had a lot of fights. He wasn't relaxing. By today's standards, it was absolutely hectic. Make these guys look like part-timers. Now Greb took it to a real extreme level because he fit not too few. Okay, ignoring fights of Langford's that might be off the radar to us today, Greb fit not too many fewer fights in his career as Langford did in his, but did it in so many less seasons. Greb didn't, you know, live to fight, to choose to fight all those extra seasons, and still had nearly as many fights on the record, which is remarkable. One thing I should say though, I feel like BoxRec has 126 for Langford's KOs. Am I wrong about that?
126. I think 156 is what I remember seeing. Maybe they made some updates at that particular period, but yeah, 150.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm just going off memory. I don't really. But I'm like, my brain suggested that to me.
Oh no, you're right. You know what? You're right. I did that wrong on that graphic. 126. You're right. Hey, see, you're on it.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, it's typo. Easy mistake to make. Man, too many numbers. I'm not even good with numbers or names.
Typo. I have to update.
I'm trying to study this stuff, but that's one thing that I've seen. You know, they have a lot.
See, look,
Yeah, some of those were TKOs, some of those were retirements, and some of those were just slaying people, knocking them absolutely senseless. Like certain guys, Jim Flynn, especially like Elbows McFadden, early in his career, he knocked him out for a couple minutes. He was out.
Oh yeah.
But Jim Flynn, when he knocked him out the first time, he needed a couple minutes just for them to be able to sort of like get him to the corner. It seems like in at least one of those Flynn knockouts, like he was in a bad shape. You can see in the footage of the third Flynn fight, they're waving the towel and stuff, and he's like, he's still struggling. He thinks he's in the fight still, flopping around. Took him a while to be able to leave the ring with some help.
Oh yeah.
What's up from Ukraine, MK?
Cheers there, MK. Appreciate you dropping by there, buddy. We mentioned Rasclot in the building right there. Appreciate you as well, Rasclot, dropping by, always sharing some good knowledge there. Let's see real quick. We have some other comments that dropped in here. MK mentions that impeccable year there for Greb, where he went 45-0, ultimately 52-0 straight in terms of the amount of fights even beyond that year. Dan mentions Jack O'Brien being the most underrated fighter ever. Certainly one of the most underrated there. Philadelphia Jack put in a lot of work.
He might be the most underrated. I mean, he certainly makes an argument. How could you even quantify that? But like, he's certainly one of them because most people don't know who he is at all. And yet he was one of the biggest stars in one of boxing's richest eras, the early 1900s. Like he was like around those first few years of the 1900s, he was one of the absolute dudes in the whole sport, making a ton of money, tons of fights, fighting a slew of notable fighters at a pace that is just breathtaking. The sort of that Greb would later do. But O'Brien,
Yeah.
man, yeah, he was a wild one. And I agree with Ross here. Hey, shout out to also Roscoff for the previews and recaps. I check out his. I don't listen to a whole lot of boxing podcasts, but I listen to his stuff like I do to yours and BLs and scrapbooks. You know, I got small circles. I check out Bruce's stuff when I can. You know, like there's a few good channels, but I've been enjoying the. Oh, that's true about BoxRec being off on certain stuff, but you know, we got what we got. I'm grateful for anything. It is helpful, but it's not like absolute.
Yeah. Yeah, certainly. Yeah, definitely. You have to look at that one. Cyber Boxing Zone, they have a lot of good information. They include a lot of stuff surrounding the exhibitions and things that took place as well. Shout out to Rough Rider Return. Says he enjoyed the site very much. Hey, appreciate your Rough Riders. Hey, we love to talk boxing history. And Rasclot, I'm going to be checking you out there, Rasclot, for sure. I didn't know you had went live, and you've been doing it for years there, Rasclot. So I'm going to be checking you out. I have that little dinger on there, Rasclot. So very much looking forward to it. Cyrillus Idilla says, Gene Tunney explained that Greb tended to leave his solar plexus open in order to keep throwing constant punches. Exploiting that opening was how Tunney was able to survive against him. Good point. Good point right there, Cyrillus Idilla. Very interesting because we know that Gene Tunney, he had a pretty solid rivalry there with Harry Greb, though more towards the tail end of Harry Greb's career, certainly past his most formidable days, but still very much a threat in the sport there. And so that's a good point that you mentioned there, Cyrillus Idillus. Appreciate that for sure. And Blake Gallimore mentions Rasclot Greb's resume is by far the best of all time. If you look at what he did at 168 pounds, he beat, I believe, 28 heavyweights, multiple times. Most top ranked. Hey, that's some top tier stuff right there, for sure, Blake. And you know that's something we can certainly dive into as well. Shout out to Dembleft. I think I'm getting that right, but salute to you there. Appreciate you dropping by. Says PGO was indeed great, but also cricket. Philadelphia Jack O'Brien. That is. Oh yeah, you know, hey. So during those times, you couldn't put certain things fast.
Yeah, he wasn't without controversy.
Yeah,
I don't know that it was straight up. Well, I guess it depends what someone would think about crooked, but he did have side arrangements for an easy go with who was it he did it with? I know with Tommy Burns, he got double crossed. Sometimes guys would want to have one go a competitive fight, but not with a finish, so they could rematch for a bigger purse from another club. And I know he did. There was controversy. And at a different time, Jack O'Brien he wrote a play, like a thinly veiled parallel to like the double cross of Tommy Burns. So he's actually producing an off-Broadway play about about the thing. And he, of course, he was the hero character. But yeah, so he wasn't without controversy. But that was true of a lot of fighters because the lines were more blurred at times, but it wasn't a popular thing to do because obviously it cheats the public of they're paying to see. They want to see someone try to win the fight.
Oh yeah, certainly. No, good point there. Rough Riders mentioned Jack O'Brien bought his parents a beautiful home. Hey, much love there. I mean, you get into the sport and you're trying to get you're trying to get paid. These guys put in a lot of work, certainly, especially looking at the volume of fights they had back then, which speaks to just the amount of competition that was out there and then the level of fighting that was taking place. So that is some good stuff right there, knowing and seeing.
Yeah, he made a lot of money. And also, I should say, he did have a couple controversies, but he had a huge 180 something. I can't remember how many fights he had. He had a ridiculous number of fights.
Yeah, up there. And
they were almost all like proper fights. People weren't just like lining up to go have friendly goes with Philly Jack O'Brien. Like it's just that notably at least one of the fights with Tommy Burns, maybe both of them, but
I believe he fought, if I'm not mistaken, because I did a video on Tommy Ryan, I had to refresh myself, but I believe he and Tommy Ryan fought Tommy Ryan beating him. Tommy Ryan, one of the great welterweights the sport has seen. Also, one of the great middleweights. We know Philadelphia Jack O'Brien was operating in the middleweight capacity as well. So yeah, I'm pretty sure Tommy Ryan and he fought. And that was a good one there, and that speaks to how good Tommy Ryan was as well. So Philadelphia Jack O'Brien, certainly one of the top resumes out there as well during his time, and he fought a lot of top shelf competition.
And Jack O'Brien fighting across the color line, where Tommy Ryan, like, he got withering criticism from the press because he kept ducking Joe Walcott.
Oh yeah.
He wanted a match with him. He wanted a match with him when he was the welterweight champion. He wanted a match with him when he was up at middleweight. Joe Walcott just wanted the match. And then Tommy Ryan kept selectively drawing the color line, then raising it and saying, I'll fight him, I'll fight anyone. And then someone offers the purse. He's like, I am drawing the color line. So it's, even though Tommy Ryan was great, and he was great, and he has a great resume, but Philadelphia Jack O'Brien fought many of the great black fighters.
Oh yeah, certainly.
Across different weights of that era. And to me, that just gives him, even though Tommy Ryan had very few losses and he was a really talented guy, but Philadelphia Jack O'Brien, just to me personally, would rate higher because he fought a wider selection. Because at this time, if you weren't going to fight the top black fighters, then you couldn't say you were fighting in some weight classes. You couldn't say you'd fought the top contenders.
Yeah,
you could try to say it. You know what I mean? You couldn't say it with any sort of sober reflection. You couldn't. So Jack O'Brien, I give him a lot of credit in that, in spite of the agreed friendly go. But I found evidence of Langford agreeing, or suggestions of Langford agreeing to a friendly go, without the public being on it. It got canceled. It was a booking with Al Kaufman, one of the White Hopes, who had drawn the color line, but then raised it, fought Jack Johnson. But Langford and Kaufman was supposed to fight, and apparently there was some sort of side agreement, but then Kaufman was trained up for the double cross. He came in super crunchy. Langford sensed, and then the ref caught wind and said, if there was any suggestion of anything other than a heavy duty fight, he'd call it off and neither man would get paid. And Langford left town. There was a big stink about it. So at least once they were booked. They were attempted more than once, but at least one of the times they were booked for. And then about a year after that, the guy who had been managing Kaufman, who paid him up front $50,000 to then manage him for several years, I think it was 3 years of whatever he could book for him, they split under less than favorable, under friendly terms, and he came out to the papers and basically said that Kaufman had offered Langford $5,000 on the side to just go the distance and just have a good competitive fight. And then Langford caught wind of the double cross, but then the ref caught, so it became a stink. So in researching Langford or any boxer, you take the good and the bad and you just find what you find. Obviously I wasn't there. So certain fighters, they do have certain times when this or that happens. We see that with other boxers, their own controversies. Like nowadays they like the rehydration clause.
Yep.
Like, we're both going to suck ourselves down, but you can't drink. You can only have so much to replenish before I make you fight me. Weird stuff like that. And I'd see some of these things in a similar light, where someone wants an edge or someone's doing something that's a little bit outside the spirit of the sport.
Yeah, we do see that. Yeah, there have been these different advantages that have helped give a guy that slight edge in some regard in contests. So that's something worth pointing out there. Random,
it's not new. The prima donna behavior or any kind of weirdness is definitely not new. It goes all the way back.
Yeah,
and Tommy Ryan, Tommy Burns, Jack O'Brien, those guys did have certain big fights that were heavily criticized and were considered a blow to the sport because they were obviously not calling them fakers. They used to accuse Gans being a faker, Joe Walcott. So when Gans and Walcott fought each other in 1904, there wasn't a lot of betting on the fight because they were having over on the West Coast, and a lot of the sports weren't sure if they were going to have an honest go, whether that was a fair criticism or not. But they,
hey, the paper that reminds me of Walcott when he fought Frank Charles, which is amazing given that, Walcott, he would fight up the weights, even despite his size. But in one of the contests with Frank Childs, I believe Walcott broke his arm, and the papers were grilling him after that, saying that he quit in the contest, and it turned out he actually broke his arm, but they were calling him a quitter for pulling out of that contest in the midst of it.
It was
But
that
the guy had a broken
1902.
arm.
Was that his last fight in 02, maybe?
That might have been somewhere around there. I believe
I
it
think
was
that was a
Frank Childs
TKO
who was
once.
going against former colored world heavyweight champion, 2-time, as a matter of fact, first to win it twice. And that goes to show you, yeah, they were hard. They would grill these guys, even sometimes, even if they were wrong. But hey, you can't take it back if it's already out there. So
Yeah, they were
interesting stuff.
harsh. A lot of times, especially as the sport was fighting for legitimacy, and so a lot of the writers felt that they were on the side of the sport being accepted. So certain behavior that was unbecoming or that drew political heat would get criticism sometimes. But there was never like full agreement.
Yeah.
People have so like if you're reading, you know, dusty town writers out in the Midwest, you're going to get a different flavor than if you get like the Buffalo newspapers or the Boston
Oh yeah.
newspapers, which, as distinct from, say, California newspapers, like the scene was different in different places, but the main money in the early part of Langford's career was out in California.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And in
The
1910, when they were trying to put together Jeffries Johnson, Jeffries finally agreed to come back for a giant satchel of money. They were initially going to have it in California, and they were trying to book Langford and Stanley Ketchel. They were trying to book them to fight a couple days before in the same town.
Oh yeah. Would have been excellent
The
right there.
governor put the hammer down on the idea, but that could have happened. You imagine that. You get Langford Ketchel in a long, like a 45 round booking, and then Jeffries Johnson. It could have been even bigger that
We just
weekend.
saw the best of both of them had that Langford Ketchel fight taking place, because we know they had, what was it, a 6-rounder, but it's widely known that, of course, that may very well not been them going full steam ahead, certainly in regards to Langford as well, in terms of an agreement that was, I believe, in place that it would lead to a title shot, because that was non-title when they actually had met up for that little short 6-rounder, right?
Yeah, it depends on the writer. Most of the writers said it was lively, but it seemed like Langford wasn't putting the full thing into it. Ketchel did hurt him, though. I think it was at the end of the fourth. He appeared to make Langford win with a body shot. Ketchel was throwing hard. It's just, Langford was a master boxer. Ketchel was a fantastic puncher and had a lot of good attributes, but I don't
Yeah,
think
and I know
master
they're very
boxer is
important.
something I've seen him described as. The Michigan Lion, the Michigan Whirlwind. He would bring it, right? Some fighters, they bring it, and it's they have other attributes that make up for maybe a lack of finesse. Ketchel had finesse, but like his famous left shift, which is a funny
Yeah.
term because I've seen certain people in the press complaining about the overuse of that. They were talking about how, like, what it used to be, like Nonpareil Dempsey and stuff, and then they were like, well, Fitz called this that the other day, but all he did was just throw a hook, like they were like,
Yeah.
maybe they're doing a variation on it and trying to say, but anyway, Ketchel's, the first time he tried it, Langford wasn't there where he was supposed to be. He knew that trick inside and out.
Oh yeah.
You can
Mastering
find
there.
people talking about Langford's left shift before
Yeah.
I found people talking about Ketchel. So it's like, he tried to pull it on the master and he just wasn't there. So it was like Ketchel was trying, but he didn't have, Langford knew how to stretch out a fight if he wanted to. But at the same
Yeah.
time, that doesn't mean that Ketchel couldn't have won in a long fight. Ketchel
Yeah.
was an amazing talent. So they
Yeah.
would have probably had one of those great rivalries, 5-fight or more rivalries, if Ketchel had lived and gained a little bit of size, so he felt more comfortable fighting, the scariest puncher in the sport.
Yeah, that would have been amazing right there to have a rivalry between the two of them. Hey, there's a good question from Surrealist Idealist. He said, I suspected Langford would be able to target Greb's solar plexus pretty well, being shorter with a longer reach. And he asked, did Langford himself have any consistent weakness in his style or vulnerable attributes? What do you think there, Random? Good
That's a
question.
great comment, Surrealist, as always. So yeah,
Yes,
I
sir.
do. I mean, Langford was an expert at punishing the body, and said at times that fight the key to fighting big guys is. I'm only paraphrasing here. I don't have any quotes handy, but if you chop at the base of the tree, you bring the branches down to tag them. Like if you work the body, he was a real ring expert, so he knew you could work the body. Now that worked on the big guys. Hey, I don't need to reach their head at first. With Greb, he might have had to resort to the same thing. I mean, if we're talking about when they actually could have fought, when it was viable for Greb to be fighting any heavyweights, and then Langford was still competing, Langford would have trouble reaching that body. He wasn't as mobile. And at the years when there was the overlap, when Greb had moved up, Langford was not nearly as mobile, and he only had one working eye,
Yeah.
and developing cataracts in the other. So I mean, it would be tough. But if you're talking prime versus prime, it's a hard fight for Greb to avoid, especially if they're under rules that allow clinching and holding and hitting, because Langford could tear up some kidneys, and he had the arms to do it. You see in the footage of the Jim Flynn fight, Flynn is a grabby type fighter. Grab you, headbutt you, throw about 8 hooks. But Langford throws like a whipping body shot. He doesn't always throw like the pivot thing. He does like collapse his legs in and it just like whips to the body with those long arms, and it's just vicious. And Harry Wills picked up that. Harry Wills had some vicious body shots, but it's not. It seems like the whipping style was one of the ways to go about that. So it's a tough fight. It's a tough fight for Greb, especially if it's a longer booking. But yeah, I think Langford's vulnerability was like, well, he was short. His arms weren't particularly short, but he was short. So if someone could get like jab and move, Jeff Clark gave him some good fights. Even gave him his only loss of 1914, jabbing, moving. So like, yeah, if he had a vulnerability, it would be guys like if you wanted to pick a historical boxer to be able to outpoint him, you look at like Ali, Holmes, great jabbers. Maybe not so much Holmes. Ali was a lot harder to hit. Ali's upper body movement separates him because he could get his head about another foot away from you by by leaning back. He's a ballet dancer.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a great point right there, and that's good. Yeah, Langford. Yeah, he wasn't a particularly tall guy, but long as you said, it kind of made the best of kind of those natural just stylistic limbs that he had, as well as that natural strength that he was able to have, that girth, that punching ability that you're kind of just born with in some sense. So I think that did him pretty well right there. Real quick here, random Blake mentions it took Greb 7 years to finally get his title shot. The racial whites didn't want Greb to win a title for the fear that he would then defend it against a black fighter. A salute to Greb for ducking no one. Certainly. That's a great point there, Blake Gallimore. And we know he ultimately lost the title to Tiger Flowers and ended up protecting Title Flowers in the aftermath, making sure that no one messed with him in the aftermath of that contest, knowing that the title had exchanged hands. And with that, Tiger Flowers became the first black fighter to win the world middleweight title. So that was a long time coming right there. For sure. Dan Blef says Langford was better, but Ketchell's endurance may have carried him in a 40-round fight. Yeah, that would have been interesting. Would have been an interesting one right there. That would have been a nice one to see for sure. And we know both of them had that eraser, what we call that eraser and what they could do there. Tough people there from Rough Rider Returns. Indeed, there, sir. Indeed, it is. Completely different sport in that regard. Go ahead, Randall. Gotcha. Okay.
On Blake's comment, I'm not sure exactly. I thought it was a little bit later in his career when he said he got the eye injury. The 2 fights in question, when it seems like he got thumbed.
Oh yeah, that's an interesting one. I know Rathcott had brought that up as well in terms of there were some Yeah, I know Greb. So it said that Greb was blinded in the fight with Kid Norfolk. So whenever that happened, that's when he had a torn retina, I believe, or something of that nature in that fight. So we had to see what year that was.
I
But I
think I
believe
was in
that,
the early 20s. I could be wrong. I think
yeah,
it was like it's like deeper into his seasons. But yes, absolutely. Like Greb, plus these guys, scar tissue and all this stuff is just from the accumulation of punches. Like even great fight, even Langford and Greb, these great fighters who had good defense, good this and that. They still got the boxer's nose. They still took a lot of shots, a lot of shots, glancing shots too. It all adds up. And
yeah, certainly. So
and
yeah,
it
it
wasn't
could have
just
very
them.
well.
I saw a visual from the newspaper, like a picture of Rosenblum with the like noting where he got all his different injuries on his face. It's wild. It's full of
Yeah,
injuries. Like, oh, got this one from
crazy
this
amount of
guy, this
fights
one
for
from
that guy.
he got scars. He's like, oh, I got that one from this dude. I mean, this was a tough time. These guys are both teak tough. We were talking off air, Josh, but how much just how much boxing has happened. Even with all that's known, there's so much that's off the books. I see this. I found like I don't know, probably like I don't know if it's quite 40, but at least almost 40 fights for Luther Manuel, researching him for the early part of Langford's 1903. That was considered a test, but BoxRec, he only had a few fights. But I found like
Yeah.
he had a whole, they have him debuting in 1902 against Belfield Walcott. I have him debuting in 1896. I can't remember the guy's name. That's the first I found of him fighting. So like years, whole seasons of fights that it just hasn't been collected yet. I mean, it's not like it's a for-profit endeavor. So like some of these things, the info's there. But even with everything that's known, so much more actually happened. But amongst all of those boxers, all of everything, Greb and Langford, I think, make the best arguments for the greatest for their pounds. And it's not just because they did great against guys their size, because lots of people have been amazing that way. It's not just because they have so many fights at a high level. It's that they had so many fights at a high level and did great, often giving up size to the degree that's just kind of mind-blowing.
Oh yeah, certainly.
Like we talked about the Greb Tunney, like Tunney was able to give Greb more problems as Tunney gained size. And Greb got to the later stage of his career, and he had already been in there with him. Tunney was able to. He was a scientist. He was able to find ways to do better and then use his size advantage more. But they never fought where they were the same size. Like that would have probably been a world-class ass whooping. Because it's Greb. That was the same with Langford. He lost certain fights, but that's what they did is they gave up size. But that greatness. It's hard to replicate. And there's some monster resumes out there. They're great weight travelers. There are guys who did jump up the weights before they had actually grown into the size, or they never, like Walcott. Barbados Walcott never grew into some of the weight classes they fought in. He was never like without cutting weight, because the guys did cut weight in these early decades of boxing. They did condition down to an agreed weight. They just didn't have the same science about it as today, but they knew how to cut weight. Walcott walked around at about 148. He would fight. His title, it was 142 in that day, but he walked around about 148. But he fought guys. He never weighed that side, their weight in his life.
Yeah, he's only 5'1".
Incredible,
it's crazy.
Incredible. One of the very greatest of all time. He was
5'1". That's insane. You really think about it. Real quick, random shout out to my man, Cyrilus Idealist there with the $20 super chat. Man, you're far too kind there, Cyrilus Idealist. Man, hey, appreciate you there, buddy. Hey, always great having you in here. Thank you dearly there for that. And Cyrilus has a good question here. Random, he says, thanks again for all these excellent discussions. Who were Langford's fastest and most aggressive opponents? Was Jeff Clark as aggressive as Greb or similar in other ways? Hey, it's a good question right there, Random. Hey, we know we were talking about Jeff Clark, as you mentioned, but yeah, tough fighter, tough resume, one who goes overlooked a great deal, especially as it relates to this era. But if you look at this era in general, in terms of that era of the heavyweights around when Langford was fighting, Jeff Clark is the name that always pops up.
Yeah, he fought a who's who. And he I get from my understanding, the best way to describe him would be a jabber mover, but he did accumulate a lot of knockouts in his career. Maybe not at the Hall of Fame level, but like at the just competition level. Like he had some power, but he had a long reach. I can't remember his exact dimensions. I feel like he was like 5'11" and a half
Yeah,
with like
around
an
there.
80-inch reach, somewhere in that range. He had long arms and he knew how to use them. The first time he fought Langford in 1910, he got blown out, but the next time was a totally different fight because he'd already been experienced, but he had a lot of experience in the 4 years until the second one. So, I'm sure like many, he evolved over his career and he naturally gained some size while he was gaining experience. So I don't want to try and define Clark too much. I don't know enough. I haven't researched him directly yet.
Yeah.
Because I'm still in Langford's early seasons. I jump around a little bit, but most of my energy goes to his early seasons. He doesn't meet Jeff Clark till 1910. I've researched 1910, but not pertaining to him. It was pertaining to the Johnson-Jeffries super fight and the attempts to match Langford with both Stanley Catchell and Tommy Burns.
Mm-hmm.
Tommy Burns is another guy. They had 3 times they tried to set up Langford and Burns, or 3 times it looked like it was going to happen. There were more offers than that. Sometimes the money wasn't right. Same with the Ketchel fight. They tried to match Ketchel with Langford, but they're offering Ketchel 20,000 plus expenses, and then Langford's offered $5,000. Langford's manager's like, yo, you better talk some sense. Come with something sensible. So with Burns, they managed to get it close enough. It was going to be 15 to Burns, 10 to Langford, and they were going to fight, but it didn't end up happening.
Yeah. Yeah, no, good stuff right there. And
I'm sorry to answer. Sorry, Cyrilus, I went on rambling. To answer your question about, so Jeff was not as aggressive as Greb, but he was a mover. Yeah. He could get, and apparently he could stop guys, plenty able to, but he used his range. So no, he wasn't like an in and out to the degree that Greb was, like the flurries and all that madness. Greb was like, abstract artist. He was just a mad genius of controlled aggression. Clark seems to have been more methodical about his, but very able and fought just a who's who. So he'd been in there with so many legends, so many times with legends in series. He had his stuff together. But someone asked about the fastest, most aggressive opponents. Patsy Sweeney was very aggressive. That he fought in 03, stopped him in the 12th of 12. Of course, I think Jim Flynn was probably his most aggressive, not his fastest, but Fireman Jim Flynn was hyper aggressive. He comes in, if you watch the footage of Langford and Flynn, and if it's not the speed adjusted version, if you put it on rough, like 75% on YouTube for the hand cranked ones that haven't been adjusted yet, it'll get you close. It'll be a little bit slow, but it'll get you close to real time. And you can see Flynn just right away. He's like hook, 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 hook. Clinch and hook, throw a little headbutt in there, 1 or 2, as he gets warmed up. I mean, so I think Flynn, I think that was just, he was like a really fast starter and just a really in your face, like close the gap, get in your grill.
Yeah.
So maybe he would get the thing, but Langford did fight a lot of aggressive opponents.
And McVeigh, he's one of those guys who, even though this fight, kind of the time frame or whatnot, but he's another guy who was big puncher.
That's true. That's an interesting aspect to their rivalry, was that McVeigh fought Langford on the retreat, but he was smart about it because the guys who didn't fight Langford on the retreat got knocked out or beaten, with only very few exceptions. I think Big Sandy Ferguson kept it close and he got a draw, but I saw people criticizing the draw, saying he shouldn't have. Sandy didn't deserve even a draw, but generally, if you didn't back away from Langford and find a way to stay away, you got clocked. So McVeigh was smart enough and tough enough to go fight many rounds, and it wasn't till several fights into their series that Langford stopped him. Hey, and speaking of stopping, Friday, if I can I shout out my live stream Friday?
Oh, yeah, certainly.
Yeah, Friday, 4 p.m. Eastern time, the boxing librarian at Scrapbook Boxing honor me with another visit to my channel for a panel discussion on we're just going to each talk about 10 top tier knockouts in boxing history.
Oh, awesome.
No criteria, so I don't know if they're going to go with some TKO and retirement stoppages, because there's some great fights that they were stopped in the corner, but they were great. The end of the action was incredible. So we never set criteria. We're grown folk. We can just say, well, so we're just going to come with 10 great knockouts each.
Thought evoking right there. I'm wondering if Joe Gann's Kid Herman is going to make that list.
That's the thing. It certainly could, because it's one we have footage of, and is that the one where he punches him in the armpit and then knocks him out with the other hand? Like,
yeah,
he counters the jab by punching him in the pit. There was one of his knockouts where he punches the guy in the armpit as he's throwing, and then clocks him with the other one. It's just magic.
And he was kind of coming back and was like, shot that right in.
Yeah, just punch him off balance and take him out. Yeah, that's
top tier right there.
It didn't make my list, but it could make someone's list, man. And if someone, I think if they bring up stuff that's already on my list, I might change it and shout out different finishes. We're not really like trying to make lists. We're defending, even if it's done like a countdown. You know, we just got to celebrate. There's a lot to celebrate.
Good stuff. Yeah, great question there, Cyrilus. No, looking forward to that random. I'll share it as well. So no, appreciate that. So yeah, that'll be a good one to check out right there, folks. Especially if you're into knockouts, which hey, we all love knockouts in boxing. Max Duran had a good one. Max, he said Greb or Ketchel, both in their prime, would be a slugfest. Yeah, I'd imagine so. I'd lean on the side of Greb. Of course, Stanley Ketchel would try to catch him, and I don't think he knocks out Greb. You know, in my opinion, him being a big puncher, regardless, irrespective of that, I just think he'd find Greb hard to catch and consistently lay a hand on. So I pick Greb in the long run for that contest. That's me thinking about it, and I think he would have more tricks of the trade in terms of how he chose to operate and box, and he would leave Ketchel probably at times just kind of winging for air. Might even swing one of those shots where he falls to the ground or something, you know?
Yeah, I think that's a tough one for Ketchel. You know, now if Ketchel had lived into his mid-20s and kept gaining size, and it was one of those fights where Greb was fighting a light heavyweight, like a full-blown light heavyweight, maybe that would be a tougher fight. Because I mean, we have to remember Greb died young, so his middleweight days were coming to an end, but his light heavyweight days were ahead of him. And there were guys like Jeanette was only just above. Well, he was a little bit above the light heavy, but maybe he could have trained down to it. Langford was there as a light heavy. There were some great middleweights as well that were like outgrowing the division. So if Ketchel lived, man, it was gonna get crazy. Even if he wasn't gonna keep making middleweight, like even if he couldn't still make that, but at light heavy. So maybe a heavier Ketchel would have more success against Greb, even if it was partly due to a size advantage. Greb was that special, but I feel like Greb would confuse Ketchel. Not that it's automatically he came later, so he's better, but Greb specifically was a wild man. And I think by the time Ketchel would need a few fights before Greb even ran out of tricks that he hadn't seen before. I think it would be a tough one for him. But against other great middleweights, give Ketchel a really good chance. He could really hit. He was a rough character. He was a tough one. So it's not to take him lightly, but specifically Greb, that's a rough fight, I feel like.
Yeah, I'm agree. I think Blake made a good point. Greb threw 150 punches around, whereas Ketchel more conventional 40-50, too fast there. Oh yeah, I'm in that same neighborhood there. I think it would have been a good contest for spurts and spots in the contest in itself. But yeah, I'd certainly lean Greb in that regard. Dan mentions Langford is a natural heavyweight, way bigger. Short is an advantage for a great fighter, but Langford huge. Let's see. Max Duran, Drew Blake, Stanley Ketchel put Harry Greb on the canvas for good. Can Stanley Ketchel put Harry Greb on the canvas for good? Yeah, not sure about that one there. So that would be a good little point.
In theory, he could. He put Jack Johnson on his butt. Now, that just pissed Johnson off, and he got absolutely flatlined in the next exchange. Right. But Ketchel could really hit. Now, the question is, could he set it up on certain guys? Greb's a hard one to set it up on. Greb had a lot of discipline. To ride the wave of chaos takes a lot of discipline. Look at like Joe Calzaghe, some of his late career performances where he's riding the chaos. That takes a lot of skill to not, because you're breaking some rules. You have to adjust on the fly. You know, but I don't want to sell Ketchel short because he could really crack. He was special. He wasn't famous just because he had good people. He did have a powerful manager. His early manager, Willis Britt, the brother of Jimmy Britt. He had a good manager, but no, Ketchel earned his praise.
Oh yeah,
By the
certainly.
end of, we actually did the countdown. Me, Scrap, and BL on great seasons in boxing. And 1908 was one of the seasons I highlighted in part because of Ketchel. He won and then lost and re-won the middleweight title. He fought a lot of dudes in 1908. Stopped a lot of them. Stopped both Sullivan brothers, twin Sullivans.
Oh yeah,
Mike Sullivan and Jack Sullivan. Stopped them both to start off the season. How about that? Bing bang. Those guys were serious. They're from around here, Charlestown, I think.
Oh yeah, yeah. You know, Ketchel is. I was looking, and Ketchel, I believe he holds the distinction of knocking out two brothers in back-to-back fights because he knocked out both Mike and Jack in back-to-back fights. I was looking. I wonder if there's others out there. You know, we had some other brother duos, but I believe Ketchel was the only one.
I don't think. Let's see. Abe Attell's brother fought, right? Monty Attell, was that his brother?
Yeah,
but I don't know that Abe was getting stopped like that, where there would even be an opportunity for someone to. I feel like it's probably unlikely that, but maybe in the amateurs. I imagine there are more brothers that can like both be competing actively at the same time. The adversity of the pro ranks, which is the next level. You know this, Josh. You see a lot of amateur guys. I imagine not all of them go on to turn pro and go try to take it up to that next level.
It's pretty crazy. Yeah, some don't, and then some, you know, they end up not staying focused, and they're out of the gym right at the time where they're probably really coming into something. And as I say, the streets calling, all that stuff. You try to keep them focused, keep them active, and in the gym and all that stuff, but you can't keep everyone there, you know, and that's unfortunate in itself as well. So you see some of that. And we actually just lost a fighter. Shout out to we actually just lost a fighter to some gun violence here who recently won the Golden Gloves here for he was a PVA fighter out of Maryland, Odenton, Maryland. That is, I don't want to butcher his name. And he was a heavyweight who was going to eventually turn pro for us here. Let me see here. I want to shout him out real quick because I want to make sure I get his name right because I have a means for butchering some names at times. You know how that can be. But it's very unfortunate. It happened just the other day here. And we were just showing some love there in the Isaiah Olagbimi. So Olagbimi, that's what his name is. Isaiah Olagbimi. He won the Golden Gloves here at heavyweight here in 2024 back in April. And it's unfortunate. Gun violence here the other day.
So bad.
So craziness.
Boxing has, been a sort of like a way out of that tough few opportunities life for so many young men and now young women, where people can, there's overlapping skill sets to surviving in a street setting and surviving in the ring in a competition setting where the actual point is not ice hockey, which is a great sport, but the actual point is the fight. In the fight game, it's tough. It's tough getting into, even at any level, at amateur level. I saw when I was training just recreationally, guys are cutting weight and going through multiple week camps for amateur fights. They're paying money. They're torturing themselves and paying money to go fight someone who's training specifically to beat them up. I mean, it's like serious stuff out here. So I love that you do. I love that your participation in the amateurs, because combat sports, the benefit goes beyond just the people who are able to turn professional and make good money. There's a benefit. There's a discipline involved. There's goals. There's risk management. There's just so much involved in martial arts as far as building character, and that does overlap into the entertainment, the prize fighting aspect of martial arts. More so, I think, because it's much more battle tested when there's something at stake, whether it's trophies like amateur trophies or the money. You know, you add stakes. So that's why, you know, if you look at effective martial arts, they're competition sports, competition martial arts.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, good points right there. So yeah, you know, the sport, hey, it hits home. Yeah, no, in Isaiah's case, he was active in the gym and everything. It was a neighbor situation that
So
unfortunately
sad.
led to the loss of a life. It's a shame for sure. And shout out to my man Brian Duncan right here. Says, "Hey Joshua, great matchup, prime for prime. They were never really considered to meet up, but when both were active, at the time it was all wrong. Arguably the two greatest pound for pound fighters ever. Indeed, there, Brian. Salute to Brian Duncan. Hey, random Brian Duncan, buddy of mine right here. Hey, he put me
Oh,
on
what's
game
up, Brian?
Greb.
Miss Duncan, you make great point. Because
Yeah,
I think a lot of people, for people who go by resume and really look at the past, it's hard not to have Greb and Langford very near, if not at the top of that conversation.
yeah, yeah,
You run
certainly.
into some other monster resumes. I mean, there's some from well-known fighters. Like a close look at Sugar Ray Robinson's resume does not disappoint. You're
Hey,
like,
hey,
oh, you
and
know,
and and random, I have to mention my man Brian there. He has a book that's called The Ice Punch. I got to shout that out for sure. Excuse me. It's a boxing book. It's a very unique and interesting story. It ties in the Titanic and it ties in two boxers who just so happen to be on the uh, Titanic at that particular time. Di Owens and the other guy's name escaped me, but a very good story right there. Certainly worth checking out. I know you're into books. I'm gonna pull up the actual picture of the cover right there. But Brian, he put me on game with a lot of stuff right there. Brian,
oh, cool.
he isn't gonna say it himself, but man, he's a historian there in his own right.
Yo, that's
Studied
what's
the
up.
history.
Shout out to Brian.
Brian Duncan there, and he man, yeah, we used to have a lot of chats about like Harry Greb. He really put me on game on a lot of stuff as it related to Greb, Les Darcy. I've done some videos on them since then, but salute to Brian in that regard because man, he was really behind that, having some of those conversations with him there. That's the Ice Punch right there, the cover for the book, The Ice Punch, and I'm telling you, great story right there. It's
It's a
worthy.
great
Hey, I know
graphic.
you like to read there. I know you like to read there, random. This is a good one right here. Titanic boxing weave together. I know you were into the history in general there, random, and I'm sure others on here as well. But this is a worthy book. I have it. I have it here.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I might have to get that.
Yeah, I was actually in the midst of reading it again. I'm trying to see where I put it, but I'm in the midst of reading it again because we're gonna get Brian on here at some point soon. We're gonna talk about the Ice Punch right there, and it's a good
Oh,
one right
very
there.
cool.
Very interesting story, and it's a great read. It's not too long either. So want to throw
Nice.
that out there. So salute to you there, Brian. Salute to you. Appreciate you for sure there. So check out the Ice Punch right there by Brian Duckett. I'm pretty sure you will enjoy it. I'm telling you, if you're into interesting stories, you will enjoy it. And of course, we know the story of the Titanic. So yeah, there are some expectations I'm sure that will kind of come into mind just based on that in general right there. But the story you will enjoy for sure. Blake mentions that Langford totally carried Cutler that first meeting just to get that second fight that never happened. I know that was supposed to happen right there. He was expected to get a title shot out of the
Yeah,
mix.
most of the writers, not all, but most of the writers, one of the New York writers went crazy. And he was like, Ketchel schooled him. He absolutely beat him to pillar, and Langford scared. You know, and you can see, okay, that's an outlier. Yeah, most of the reports were saying that Langford didn't put the full treatment on Ketchel, but the Ketchel was throwing hard. And I only saw, I think, maybe one writer who thought Ketchel was carrying Langford. So, like, there wasn't universal opinions, but the majority opinion was that Langford was taking a little bit easy on Ketchel. He wasn't trying to force the issue too much. But of course, there was some big money available for either a finish fight in the Midwest or a 45 rounder in California. And Langford had
Yeah,
just been out in California fighting fireman Jim Flynn and had that fantastic performance in the San Francisco area in the second fight of the year against Flynn, and then came back over to Philly. So like, like there was money out there in California, and Langford had a stunning performance in California. Well, he was partly criticized for the first Flynn fight in Cali that year in Los Angeles, but Langford vowed to never fight in LA again. He didn't like the newspaper decision. He wasn't feeling that. But then after that, he blamed his training. They brought George Byers out, George Budge Byers, who you've done stuff on 86, to take over his training. And in the 45 rounder rematch of the year, he smacked him around. So there was definitely money for them. So yeah, I'm sure they both had that in mind, but it does seem like Ketchel was putting a lot of effort into the fight. Langford wasn't quite using his full arsenal. But that doesn't mean that he would have automatically won a long fight. Ketchel carried his power late into a fight, And I suppose I should mention, where we're talking Greb Ketchel, one of the commenters here mentioned Ketchel's stamina, and that's true because Greb had great stamina, but did he fight 45-round fights? Did he have anything booked that long? He didn't. So maybe in a finish fight, maybe Ketchel, like after you get 20, 30 rounds in, maybe Ketchel does catch him. Hard to say. I don't want to write Ketchel off. He was a unique fighter, but it's a tough one against Greb. But I suppose the longer the fight goes, maybe there's opportunity there.
Oh yeah. No. I think you make a good point. Jim Barry, I tell you, Dan mentioning Jim Barry, was he like undefeated? Like a little, what is he, bantamweight or something like that? Or am I thinking about someone else?
Oh no, Jimmy Barry was an undefeated, but Jim Barry from Montana.
Oh,
or at least he was described Montana Cowboy. He was protege of sorts of John L. Sullivan, but I think he had one defeat already when Langford first fought him. But at least one defeat. But yeah, he was a tough character. I think he was about 195 in his prime. But they fought a bunch of times. Barry was never able to beat Langford, but he did knock him down more than once during their fights, which itself is notable.
Oh yeah, I was thinking of
Barry could throw, but he just couldn't quite. He got some draws, but he didn't. I think he got 2 draws out of this series. I'm trying to remember how many times they fought. Maybe 12 times.
Okay.
And he didn't get stopped every time he lost. So he didn't get a win over Langford, but he did have two even fights that were judged even. And with a ref's decision, you could win more of the rounds than the other guy, but you took more damage in the rounds that you didn't win and end up with a draw. So it doesn't, we're not talking about a point system yet during Langford's career where the ref and 2 judges or 3 judges are giving you a decision. It's more like the ref is like, yeah, that looked like a draw to me.
Oh, gotcha.
Like Langford's fight with Barbados Walcott. Like if it was strictly on the points, he's the welterweight champ after that. But that's not. The Walcott staged such a ferocious rally, in the last several rounds that the ref was like that. He evened it right up. It's like in Japan, in mixed martial arts, in Rizin, the promotion in Japan, they do whole fight judging. Now they have more criteria than just what the ref thought. But they do just judge the fight as a whole, even though it's broken up into rounds. And that's kind of like what we're talking about for Langford's early career.
No,
The ref makes a determination if he's allowed to.
Yeah, and that did happen a ton. Hey, even over there in the UK, at least I know I believe in England for sure, but probably in other parts of the UK, there are still some bouts where the judge is the deciding judge as far as who's the victor. You see that on like some of the DAZN broadcasts, all that type stuff. So yeah, certainly not uncommon. Still rings true to this day in some contests. Dan mentions Jim Barry killed in a shootout at Panama Saloon after his fight with Sam McVeigh. Drug addict, cowboy, tough as nails. Yeah, that's crazy right there.
Yeah, and he went to Australia. He participated in that the madness of 1911. I think he got there in 1911, but he certainly by 1912, 1913. He was murdered the day. He was shot to death the day after he lost to Sam McVeigh, I believe, in Panama.
Oh, yeah. That
sucks, right? Lose a fight and then get killed.
Man, That is
But yeah, he
pretty
had a lot of he had some problems there too, like substance abuse and things like that. But yeah, he was a tough character, and he was down to fight. Jim Barry brought it, and he fought some great fighters. He just, especially Langford, they tangled a lot. So it's not one of Langford's main rivalries, but it's not unimportant because, like I said, Barry's like about $195. Langford's given up 20 or more pounds to him. Even the heavier version, even because like 1913 Langford, 175, 180, somewhere in there, probably. I'm not sure. Maybe even more. I'm trying to remember what he was for the Jeanette fight. Maybe he was 185 for the Jeanette fight at the end of 1913. I'm not sure. It seems like in shape, he would have been 175, 180, and then maybe does he have extra pounds on a given night? Yeah, Barry had a size advantage on him. He could really punch, but he's just, some guys maybe in a different era, they would do better or worse depending on the types of fighters that are surrounding them. Like maybe in a different era, Jeff Clark would have been one of the very top fighters. But he was fighting in an era with multiple heavyweight Hall of Famers all fighting busy schedules, and he was part of those busy schedules, so it's tough on him.
Yeah.
That's how it goes. There are guys floating around today that are threats in any combat sport that are serious threats, great resume, dangerous, but for one reason or another, they don't end up with the accolades or the win-loss success because they're surrounded by just great fighters. Like the contenders from Greb's era, many of them would be champions of some description in like today. So many belts, so many weight classes. The jump from middleweight. There's so many more jumps from say middleweight to light heavyweight to heavyweight today. Can you imagine if you're like, oh, you can't make 170? I guess it's today 175 today, so you can't make 175. All right, man, it's open weight for you. It's guys of every description, every size, all the way up to 200 and however many pounds. It's a little easier to ease your way in today for guys who don't happen to be optimal right at cutting to the weight class. There's a lot of opportunities today, so it's good. I mean, the structure today gets more guys paid.
Yeah, you can say that. Yeah, they get more opportunities. So that's, I guess, one of the things in terms of, even though we're in a 4-belt era, you could say watered down, more individuals get opportunities at the titles, and there is meaning behind it, especially if you're fighting and you get to this point where you can get a title shot, an opportunity, even in an era of multiple belts. Then there is meaning behind it for these fighters, and more opportunity comes about. Certainly different for those guys back then because you didn't really have the opportunities in that sense. And hey, there were really only a point like 8 opportunities you would get or something like that, and not everyone could do it, and not everyone would even get close to or even sniff the opportunity of some of those great fighters. We mentioned Langford and others. You mentioned George Elbows, McFadden.
It's not by accident that there are multiple governing bodies, essentially, like more titles and things like that, because
they get a fee too.
Well, that's right. And that's the trade-off. Pay you 4%, but in return, you can access a title and carry the belt and have that prestige and promote yourself with shiny materials hanging off your form as you come out and stuff like that. It's promoting is a lot different than it used to be when it was word of mouth and newspaper writers.
I wouldn't be surprised if we get to 5 belts. The IBO, it has gained a lot of steam and traction here over the years. So it's not considered to be one of the major belts, but you could argue, it has just as much sort of validity in some sense, just thinking about it from a sanctioning standpoint.
It really comes down to like the fighters and the matchups, as far as separate from like the consensus from the other regulators. But as far as fans, it's the fighters and the matchups. The belts don't.
Yeah.
If Canelo holds a belt.
Yeah.
What is he? A super middle, right? Does he still have all the belts?
Yeah.
Right. So if he lets them go. So if he lets them go, and 2 guys fight for one of those belts, they're not fighting Canelo. So they're not going to be like, yo, you got Canelo's belt. Gee, fucking took it from. No,
No.
they fought for the thing he left behind. So
Yeah.
it's a benefit to them to get it, but that's not the same as, so, it's still hard to beat the top guys. But now, if you beat Canelo and it's not for one of his belts, 'cause he lost, uh, that you beat Canelo, it means a lot because you beat the guy. The belt has no inherent value. I mean, it does have prestige for like casuals and the
Yeah.
history and things, but it doesn't actually have any inherent value in a competition sense. It's
Yeah.
just
You
about
don't
the
have to beat the
fights.
man these days for sure. You don't have to beat the man to get that title or get a title. So yeah, interesting. But yeah, more opportunities, So
Yeah, it's
you
not
kind of
accidental.
double-edged
It works
sword,
out that way. Yeah, today to that point without having to have 150 fights to get an opportunity. I mean, it's sort of
Yeah.
worked out the way it has to adjust for the promotional cycle and the reality of how people promote prize fighting. But if
Hmm.
more guys can make money and safer, yes, it might be watered down. But
Yeah.
like if you're rock climbing with oxygen equipment, if you're mountain climbing with oxygen equipment, you're more likely to live.
Yeah.
It maybe that's watered down. But does that mean that it's a bad thing for the people involved? If you're climbing mountains, you'd probably rather live than die on the mountain, even
Yeah.
if someone could say that's the watered down version. Or you're
And that's
doing it
why
in special boots. You're not wearing sandals.
yeah.
Like,
And random. That's why I say like the evolution of boxing, I think is more so on the side of safety, some of those opportunities, the conditions. That's where the evolution of boxing has seen its greatest growth, as far as I'm concerned. And everyone has their varying opinion because you hear those stories of like all the athletes today are better. I don't think that's necessarily the case, or whatnot, because you can look at some guys here stylistically today and know that there were guys in the past who were more skilled, better fighters than these individuals. Now, there are more things available, conditions are better. And as mentioned, the evolution of where we are from a safety standpoint, like these opportunities you mentioned, yeah, that's to a higher degree now, where we're at here in the 21st century, essentially.
yeah, I mean, we know more about what the constant fighting does to the brain and the body. And also, like, we live in a safer world, or the dangers to us are different. The existential threats to our existence are different today than they were
Yeah.
back then. So, like, the sport is like many things. Yeah, it's just like we're in the century we're in, doing what we're doing. Like, it's natural for the sport to evolve. It's as there are reasons and like a wider awareness of certain concerns, and a lot of competitors have died over the years, and the sport has or suffered brain damage, and the sport has adjusted so it doesn't become untenable in a modern society. Sorry, you're not 45 round fight. There's a reason they're like, no, dude, you sorry, man. I know you guys want to fight to a finish, endless rounds in 4-ounce gloves with a
Yeah,
really
right.
hard
Crazy.
ring that could kill you if you fell wrong on it, and all this stuff, and no protection for the turnbuckle. Just stay out of the, you know,
Yeah,
and
it's
you're
just
allowed to kidney punch, and we'll let you get the first few headbutts in before we take a point or stop the fight. Like none of that would be good now, or like,
yeah.
and the different things, like some of these arguments that now would take for granted, like Ted Kid Lewis wanted to bring in a molded mouthpiece.
Oh yeah,
Well, it
yeah.
helps you take a punch. If you can bite down on a fitted mouthpiece, they help you take a punch. Maybe guys use a piece of fruit like orange peel, something. Maybe they do something to just going tooth on tooth in your own mouth. But like these were things that were actually discussions. The length of fights, how long title fights would be, the conditions, what was allowed, like kidney punches. Like it
Yeah.
was during Langford's early career. Like I remember seeing it was, I think it was a little bit before they instituted the Lonsdale belt, but after, I can't remember if it was before or after Langford had beaten Iron Hague's English heavyweight championship in 1909, but
Mm.
they were going to ban kidney punches at the National Sporting Club.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you'd see guys debating in the press and things like that, and making so like certain rule changes, and a lot of these fantasy fights, as you know, as we've done our different shows, 86.
Yeah.
The rules and conditions have a lot to do with who would have the greater opportunity to utilize their strengths. That's
Yeah,
very true of a guy like Greb and Langford. They fought under different restrictions, but how a certain matchup will go, yeah,
yeah.
because the tactics would have to fit the thing.
And that's why you didn't see as many TKOs back in the day, because you literally bludgeon a guy to the point of them barely being able to stand, and they could ultimately finish the fight. But that being said, yeah, you saw some straight up knockouts and all that stuff. But we've seen some of the footage of some of the guys just taking an absolute beating that wouldn't be allowed in any capacity today.
Yeah, definitely. Some of the things where you see the guy and he's so wobbly, and you realize it's the end of the competitive part of the fight. So do you just wait to actually see the guy splashed out? Well, I mean, society's changed to
Oh
where
yeah,
it's not as rough and tumble, the wider perception of sports. And there's a lot of other sports that are much safer, inherently safer than something like this, or the risk of injury is like I pulled a tendon, which is different than I got brain damage because I got knocked down 6 times and the ref let me get up where I'm just standing there taking flush punches, but I'm so well
right.
trained. I'm on my feet getting brain damage. That's not good, you know.
Yeah. No, certainly,
It's a it's a sport. So like there's MMA is dealing with the same thing. They're trying to balance not having people being crippled and killed with
yeah,
a very rough endeavor that people love to watch and that people love to participate in. So, it's tough people, but you can't, this, Josh, like their fights and people argue whether the trainer should stop it or not. Didn't Wilder get on his trainer for
mm-hmm.
stopping a fight? Well, like, dude, don't get beat up that bad then. If you don't
Right.
want to, if you don't want to be stopped, then train better,
The
improve
trainer
the
knows better
technique,
than the referee in
focus on
terms of what
defense,
you're capable
focus
of
on,
dealing with.
sorry, brother.
I was saying the trainer knows better than the referee what you're capable of dealing with.
Yeah, and he has every right to pull you from a fight if you're getting smacked around. He's worried about your health or
That's
the
what you
state
should
of your
want.
career. It's part
That's
of the
what you should
sport.
want.
The same reason, like there's things that are just a good idea in the sport, right? That's one of them. If you're getting absolutely shellacked and it's like a career-changing beating, yeah, man, you can take the guy out of there. Why not?
Yeah. No.
Just like usually if an NFL team is blowing out the other team, they get their starters out of there. Have
Yep.
the second and third team finish the blowout instead of risking an angry defender just trying to take a revenge shot on the QB and putting him out for games. Like it's just a sensible thing to do for safety in sports. Different things at times.
Oh yeah. Certainly, and I think that that's stuff you have to take into account for sure. And yeah, you see what that, and like I said, for the better. I'm not necessarily saying it's a bad thing. Certainly for the better, and athletes, some of them lasted a lot longer today than they did back in the day, for instance, with the amount of fights and things of that nature that they had. So you gotta salute that. Real quick, I want to send a shout out to Skywalker Boxing, dropped in. Skywalker Boxeo says salute to Josh in the chat. So appreciate you there, Skywalker. Be sure to go check out Skywalker, folks. Doing a lot of good stuff there on this channel right there. Give them a subscribe there. As a matter of fact, everyone on this thing, subscribe to each other. Hey, it's all building bridges, showing love. Angie Wise Fool. Hey, what's going on there? Angie says salute. Appreciate you there, Angie. Drop
Angie.
good stuff right there. Glad to have you. Blake Gallimore says random. That's why I placed Greb as pound for pound above all fighters. He fought so many more top competitors than any of the top 5 GOATs, and he always did it at a weight disadvantage. Oh yeah, certainly. That's something to definitely take into account.
Yeah.
And mentions
Greb
that
is the top fighter of all time is perfectly fair opinion. I mean, there's so much evidence for his greatness, and if his mountain is taller than Langford's for somebody, it doesn't bother me. These guys are just, I can't even wrap my tiny brain around their careers yet. I've been trying for a few years now. So, yeah, whoever gets blown away the most, hey, it's fine. These guys it's just incredible. It's mind-blowing. It really is.
Oh, yeah. Hey, Andrew Wise Fool mentioned Langford rode with a burlap bag over his head in the back of a wagon through the woods to an unknown opponent. Greb ain't did that. Langford is the greatest. Hey, good point right there.
Well, I think it's fair to say that Langford faced a particular kind of adversity that Greb did not face to that degree. Greb did. There were times when racial politics would get in the way of matchmaking, but it affected Langford much more directly and in that really ugly way. So I think if someone wants to count overcoming adversity, yeah, Langford faced more adversity, but in just a competition sense about how much these guys could get opportunity, Greb did end up with more opportunity.
Oh yeah,
Because he was on the other side of the color line, but that's not his, but he certainly wasn't someone who was scared of fighting across the color line himself. He just
oh
happened to
yeah,
be white in that era, those politics. But yeah, Langford faced an incredible amount of adversity, and some other guys who had faced the strong racial adversity, they did end up getting an opportunity, like Dixon and Gans and Walcott had. Langford got that one shot, but then it was just tough because he started fighting up the weight classes where the politics were higher. Middleweight and light heavyweight and heavyweight, especially middleweight and heavyweight at that time, there was a lot of opposition to. There was big money in it, but there were plenty of voices that didn't want to see the championship contested between a white dude and a colored guy.
oh yeah,
Just how it was.
certainly.
Jim Corbett was one of the loudest, most racist.
Oh yeah,
I'm not going to swear at him, but like he was so bitter, and for a guy who barely defended his belt, basically toured the South doing theater performances, he knew what his racist audience wanted. They wanted him to not put that belt up and to unify the titles. But after that, after his heyday was gone, he was so bitter in the press. He did so much damage to the fairness. Like his advocacy was absolutely against competition fairness. So, and that lasted. He was one of the most vitriolic voices in the press against Jack Johnson.
Oh yeah, certainly. Yeah, old gentleman Jim, not so gentlemanly at times there, huh? So for sure,
Really wasn't. Because plenty of people back then had a lick of sense. It wasn't like everyone was just horribly racist, stuff like that. Because that you have to assume that only racist white people counted back then. Like as far as how we think of people today, human beings. So yeah, he was awful. Talented boxer, but I feel like he got a lot more credit than was necessarily his due because he was white in a time when most of the great technicians of his day were not. And he was a white heavyweight champ. So he got they gave him a lot of credit for pioneering in a way that other people had already done for him. Like you want to talk pioneer, let's talk George Dixon, little Georgie Dixon, little chocolate.
Yeah, Dan mentions him. Yeah. World champion in 1800s, really something. Yeah, George Dixon. Yeah, he was
right
another
on
one.
Time. Dan mentioning the great little child who's buried near here. I should do a live stream from his graveside.
Yeah, unfortunate story, and too. Just thinking about, oh yeah, you should do that. That would be pretty dope, And I intend to do a video on him. I actually started a paragraph. This was like last year at some point, but I haven't gone back in since then. But yeah, he's another one of those guys. We have some stuff out there on him. Certainly not enough, and true pioneer.
You want to do one together? You want to do a live stream, and I'll go from Mount Hope Cemetery.
I'm pretty
sure I can get a signal there. We'll do a little Zoom meeting, and people can check out the graves. It's got his face in sort of high relief on the gravestone.
I'm down for it. Let's plan for something for sure. There, I like that line of thinking right there, Redden, for sure. So
that's what's up. We'll talk about it. That'd be very cool.
Certainly down for it, no doubt about it. Shout out to my man Paul Bright, Tipper5 there, fellow Marine right there. Paul Bright dropped in, says Happy Juneteenth to you there, fam. Appreciate you dropping in.
That's what's up.
And Surrealist Idealist had asked, ever read Mike Silver's book, The Art of Boxing, The Rise and Decline of the Sweet Science? I haven't read that one right there. Surrealist Idealist.
Oh, that looks like a book I need to read. Because it was pretty remarkable. Because there's the escalation of like how many people involved, how busy the individual people were, and then the money that was involved relative to the cost of living. Oh, look at that.
This is
Johnny
one
Kilburn.
I'm working on right now. Mark Allen Baker's latest book. Be sure to check that out, folks. Johnny Kilbane. Johnny Kilbane. This is on
You've
him.
had Mr. Baker on your channel, right?
Yeah, we're talking about this book right here. This is his latest as well. Just want to throw that out there. Johnny Kilbane, hell of a featherweight right here. And great life. So just want to shout that out as well there. So another book I've mentioned there, a random
I still have a backlog of books that I bought that I just every time I have some spare time, I go to like the newspaper archives trying to find more clippings.
Yeah, I have this
There's
thing.
so much that's just not there on BoxRec or Cyber that are directly relevant to what I'm writing about Langford's career. I'm specifically researching the part of his career that's the least that's the least covered in Clay Moyle's excellent book on his career. Those early seasons, because there's too much, there's too many fights, and a lot of those guys are only of regional or local, of note locally or regionally, so they're not, if you got over 50 fights against Hall of Famers and you're writing a book on this guy, how much can you cover the guys who are not Hall of Famers?
Oh yeah, certainly.
And have a normal size, non-Lord of the Rings thickness book. So it's, but that's where I'm at. So unfortunately, though, I have to brace against my desire to research all these other things in boxing or to read these books, but I have to stay focused. There's too much. There's too much I don't know yet to drift around. And it's tough, man. Like, even if I just go to do like a Facebook post and I go to look up a specific Harry Greb fight or something, or whatever small thing, and it just, you know how it is. You just get sucked into the matrix, and then it's like, I got to get back out. I got to get back out. I got stuff to do.
Random, I was going to say is I'm in this situation where I find myself starting multiple books at once, and I need to just, stick to one, read the first, and then go to the next. Read the other one, go to the next. But I start multiple books, reading different little parts. Maybe it's a bit more structured to go about it, one at a time, Yeah.
It is also, we structure our learning to be enjoyable.
Yeah.
So I don't see anything wrong with that, because I do that when I'm practicing, like when I'm playing, like working on my music stuff. Like, I don't just I'm not like, I'm going to sing for 3 hours. No, I like sing a little bit, play a thing. I get bored. Do some scales and rake techniques and things like that. Work on some finger picking stuff, or pick a certain song, or just listen to something and just listen to a certain part. Like this, within the greater realm of music, I can always find something that feels new, even though it's the same general area of study. Maybe that's how you're doing books, brother.
Yeah.
You don't want to read 300 pages on the same thing. You want to read like 40 and then tease your brain with something else. It's all good.
Yeah.
That's what I love about Boxing Librarian's content, because it's like these videos, 10 to 20 minutes, but it's like it goes through a fighter, but you just get all these different flavors, all these different eras, all these different great resumes. I don't know if you caught the recent ones, man. Some of those careers. See, now he's done Langford, Greb, Rosenblum, Britain. There's some more to come, but oh my goodness.
Yeah, I haven't. I've seen a number of the ones from the past, and a lot of great stuff over there in terms of the statistics that are tied to some of these fighters that he's documented on that channel. So certainly go check it out.
It's too much for my brain. So I'm glad to have people do that. And then obviously Scrapbook's channel, and I love what you've been. You have so much different content coming on your channel, man. Tim and Tim. Is it Tim and Tim or Tim versus Tim? I can't remember now.
Oh, Tim and Tim. So Tim there, Skywalker Boxing, then Tim Witherspoon Jr. there. It makes for exciting shows there.
That's a good show. But then you've done prepared videos on fighters. You have the show of Oz, obviously. You got a lot of stuff, a lot of cool stuff. Got your interviews with Mr. Baker and others. A lot of good stuff going on at 86 Boxing. Plus, you got like a nice color-coded thing going on. You're on point there, 86.
These colors out there, trying to keep these colors out there for sure. Hey, this started out as this is the colors I started with. I don't know if folks remember that. It was like this there's really a orange, red orange type color, and then a hunter green olive-ish, but more I guess on the olive-ish type.
Yeah, it's color. Like that. My gloves are that color. One of my pair of 16 ounces are that color.
Here's some old stickers right here from some years ago. I probably got these back in like 20, 19 or something. These are the last few
Wow.
that are remaining. But yeah, sticking with these colors right here. I almost switched it up once. My girl told me no, and she was right in that regard. But no,
No,
I enjoy
it's
it.
right on.
Love
You got that whole thing. I love it so much that when you come on my channel, we did our Prime versus Prime fight series. I hijacked your color. I screenshot your shit,
no, it's all good.
cropped it, and I made it my background
We're
too, or
spreading the
close to
love
it.
right there. Hey, the Zone is even using those colors in some of their broadcasts right there. I noticed
It's
that
a good
too.
color, man. It's like it's a fresh color. I love that shit. When I was a kid,
Hmm.
you know, in the
Hmm.
'80s, that was all the color. They want those neon colors.
Oh yeah, yeah. Gotta just stick to it. Black and yellow,
So
black
I
and
think that's
yellow.
what it is. I'm old enough that I'm just like, yeah. Like when I see your
Yeah.
color scheme, it's resonating with me on a childhood level.
Interestingly, folks, it looks like yellow, but it's really safety green. It's really this high
Yeah,
pitch of
exactly.
green right there. But it looks like yellow, so you can tie in the sun black and yellow, black and yellow. But safety green is the color there, folks. Look at that. Haha. Some of you probably didn't know that. Thought it was yellow.
Yep,
But
just add a
no,
little touch of a certain kind of blue to a certain kind of yellow, and you're gonna
yeah.
end up with safety green.
Yeah, so it's an interesting thing. But no, hey, I enjoy it.
I
We
don't want to
love the
front though. I
history. I
didn't
want to
know that
get
it was called safety green. I call it neon yellow, so I don't want to front and pretend like I had it right. But yeah, that's how you would get it. A little bit of blue in there.
Yeah, hey, it's all good. Yeah, you could get yellow thrown in there too. So you could go.
Yo, 80,
You're
yo,
not wrong in
86.
that regard, so.
That's perfect. It looks
But
as
no,
good as it sounds, and it sounds great. Hey,
yeah.
you said someone asked for a fantasy matchup. What was the matchup? Greb and Wills.
Oh yeah. Surrealist Idealist had brought that one up real quick before we jump into that. Want to say salute to Paul Bright again. He says life in the Greb were cut from a different cloth than 99.9% of the population. No doubt about it. They're different breed
I think we could
right
say
there.
cut from a different cloth than 99.9% of the boxing professional population. Even they really
Yeah,
were out of their minds. They were on a special level of tough and crazy. Yo, because
yes.
if you can only see out of one, like you lose your depth perception, and you're still fighting professionally. That's some next level stuff.
Yeah, Marzaic. Salute to Marzaic in the building here. Appreciate you there, Marzaic. Says, I wish we could get back to the mindset where a few losses didn't mean a fighter was washed up and needs to retire. MMA doesn't suffer from that. Good point right there, Marzaic. I do think that sometimes in the world of boxing, you get caught up in the as they say, having those zero losses or whatever. But hey, if you fight long enough against the top level competition, you eventually lose, So it's one of those things. It's a fight. And that's why you run it back at times and see who can get the other one. You run it back multiple times, and maybe the better man comes out on top, or maybe it's still not as definitive, but it's one of
Yeah,
those things. The
although
loss doesn't define you fully.
in fairness to boxing, I should say that like MMA is not as deep as boxing worldwide as a sport. Like the depth in each weight class, and there are less weight classes. So part of the reason losses don't count as much as MMA is there are many less MMA fighters walking around with 15 to 20 fights undefeated.
Yeah.
So if you're like 20-0, 25-0, and even if you haven't fought anyone notable in MMA, that's a bigger deal than say in boxing where it's pretty easy. Like you have guys, journeymen with over 100 fights, mostly losses, so you can definitely get a fight with that guy and beat him, build up a record. It's not as deep, so the risk is higher in MMA, especially like the rule set and stuff. So there are reasons why loss doesn't mean as much. There's a lot of more different ways to lose in mixed rules.
Oh yeah.
So you can be a kickboxing expert and you get submitted, and people will just say, well, you need to work on your grappling. So that's not your specialty, but you got someone exploited your. It's different in boxing because I'm sure there's an analogy, but it's just but the finesse of boxing technique is so much more specific and worked out. There's a lot of variables in MMA, so it's different. So if 20 years from now when MMA is super deep and guys maybe there's tons of guys being undefeated is no big deal. If you're 20-0, so what? So are 100 other guys close to your weight. Then maybe it'll actually be similar to boxing is today. Maybe they'll have more of an obsession with it. Because there are guys who lost, like in recent generations, who had losses. They're still a big deal. They're still top guy. You look at Holyfield. Look at like the end of Ali's career. Pacquiao, once they lost, doesn't mean they're done. If you're big enough, if you're a big enough star and you lose, you can, like Pacquiao. I mean, he got his biggest fight of his career, the biggest money fight still of all time, right? Hadn't he just lost
Oh yeah,
twice?
yeah.
Hatton, like, and the fight with Hatton was a big fight, and Hatton had already lost to Mayweather. Like, you
Oh
can
yeah.
still be big. It's just that the O is like in the age of braggadocio. Like, yeah, it's if you're undefeated, you can strut around. But most guys who are undefeated don't have, like, the most of their big fights are yet to come. So being undefeated only means heightening the tension for what you're supposed to then have. But like when it's like, say, like Wilder wins a title and then just doesn't unify for years and years until he's like old in boxing years, doesn't try to unify the title, that takes the undefeated doesn't mean as much. It leaves people open to criticism.
Oh yeah.
So I don't think it helped him staying undefeated the way he was. Maybe it helped his wallet. But in legacy, like I meant to mention this earlier, like what I was saying about the sport being safer and it's more money involved. Yeah, I don't study that though. I study greatness, combat sports greatness. And so the guys who had it tougher get credit for fighting it tougher, for surviving the tougher conditions. It's not on a curve. I don't go, oh, well, you only
Oh
have
yeah.
to fight once every 4 months and you get a training camp and you've never fought on a week's notice and you've not fought a Hall of Fame level opponent yet, but you get credit because you're one of the top guys. No, I remember BL did a thing where he took like 2023 top 10 pound for pound and took him back to 100 years or something, 120 years. And none of them would have been top 10 pound for pound because they just didn't have the work in that given year. I mean,
Yeah.
the top guys are so inactive. We like pound for pound is like an ongoing year to year discussion rather than how good a season did you have. It's not a season, it's 2 fights, 1 fight, 2 fights. You can't really measure seasons against each other. Now it's about how's your whole career gone with some recency bias, but how's the whole career? Like if you're rating pound for pound, how far do you go back? Like a couple years, 3, 4 years maybe, to look at if someone has standing as a pound for pounder, just for you. What do you
Yeah.
think? There's no right answer. I don't know the answer.
Like from rating a fighter, how far do I go back in terms of say it again? Sorry.
So like if someone's like Inoue's the top dog, okay, well it's
Yeah.
Usyk. How many fights ago, or how far back do you personally, just in your mind, do you count to like weigh that against itself, or do you go all the way back?
Oh yeah, I kind of think about all the way back. I haven't really full fledged gone through kind of those comparisons in general. What I typically do is just say like a guy like Usyk. I think they elevate themselves to that kind of all timer status in relation to their era, and how if we go through the picture in the different eras, they're going to be mentioned in that high regard. But certainly, there were guys that back in the day, I mean, just the level of work that they put in, it just the guys like Usyk, kind of pales in comparison, even though he's doing it at a high level and a high level against the competition that is available to him. But just think about some of the other guys there in the past, and yeah, there's so many more fights, just a lot more competition that they have to deal with. Then the conditions and all that stuff, it's hard to look at it one for one. So you kind of have to group it in the era. Now, there are probably some traits and things of that nature that would make you lean towards, okay, yeah, this guy would probably do well with said fighter from this era in the past, but certainly conditions could dictate things in a fashion that, yeah, it's not necessarily cut and dry, So I generally just kind of say, oh yeah, they've reached a status where they're going to be mentioned in the tops amongst the era, and they'll be told in that story amongst the greats of the past,
Yeah, I
or
feel
they'll
you,
be
man.
spoken about, So yeah, that's
Yeah,
kind
because
of
like all time pound for pound, straight up resume, and then put the resume in context. But with like current race. It's a lot slower race today, fight to fight, than it was back when, like the era I'm studying. They were like just basically recapping the year. So who's the top guys? Well, who had the top year? And obviously the champion gets special consideration because they're the guy holding the title. Everyone else is trying to get their crack at those titles.
Yeah.
But they still, like I mentioned, Patsy Sweeney, one of the years in the late 1800s, he was right near the top of the list in the newspaper because he had so many fights and did so well in them. So, like, even though he wasn't champion, at least that one year, people were giving him a lot of credit because he was doing it like they wanted, where you have a bunch of contests and you mostly win.
Yeah.
You know, you see that carries on, like even later generations. But at some point, most of the contenders slow down to match the pace of the champions, or only barely outpace the champions.
Oh yeah, certainly.
And that's just to preserve their bodies for the opportunities, so the opportunities come later today. So like with Usyk, like it's awesome what he just did, but he's an old man in boxing terms now. It says a lot of good things about him, that he's good enough to be at that level at that age, but he's like the crescendo's that's a long arc.
Yeah,
even
Greb
though it's not a lot of fights.
Or well before 30. You think a guy like Greb and his best was far past him before he hit 30, you know, or his best was certainly past him, you know.
Yeah. How many fights does Usyk have?
It's under 30, but it's like probably 24, 25 or something like that. Let me see here. But yeah, it's not a
so if we relate it to Langford had more than 25 fights by the end of 1903. So he had more fights, more professional fights, like 20 months into his career than Usyk's had in however many years it's been a pro.
22 fights
not
for
at the same level. Obviously, Usyk's been. So I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying in terms of just how many times someone stepped in the ring. You know, like it has changed over the years. Not everyone fights at the super slow pace the whole time, but.
And Usyk has fought at a high level, you know, because he did fight in the Cruiserweight World Boxing Super Series, and he won that. So he had to go through the best cruiserweights to get there in his bracket, and he beat the guy Marius Briedis in the finals, who would prove to be the second best cruiserweight in the world before he eventually lost to Jay Opataya in a very close fight. So Usyk, he's gone about it in a way where he's fought a high level of competition. We know he beat Anthony Joshua twice, beat Tyson Fury. I mean, he worked his way into it. So you got to give him props in terms of, he went about it the right way for a guy with 22 fights. That's what it ultimately is. There are random 22 fights. He's done a lot in 22 fights, you know, made the best of the opportunities that he's gotten, and he's taking them serious. You can see that he's a guy who's dedicated to his training and really puts forth a true effort when he's going into there. And real quick, I want to say shout out to my man Alex Campbell holding it down there. Mentions Johnny Dundee, the Scotch Wop. They had serious battles with Benny Leonard. Johnny Dundee did a little short video on him not too long ago. But appreciate you being here, Alex. Always great to have discussions with you. Also mentioned Zivic and Jersey Joe had many more losses before winning championships. Certainly tough careers right there. Tough careers, tough fights for sure. But yeah, I wanted to mention that there, random, but certainly, Usyk, high level fighter, and I think he's done very great. Just in general in terms of his time here in the sport and what he's been able to accomplish. But he is a older fighter at this point. I think he's 38, 39, maybe somewhere around.
I mean, he epitomizes what. Like the model today, you come up steadily but surely, and you pack in top level fights, and you achieve things, and you make a giant pile of money before you're done, and get recognized as a top fighter in the sport, and great in your own right. So I mean, Usyk, like, fights and tons of money is a bad thing. I mean, the man's done great things. It's just different eras and different ways that people had to go about finding success and what success meant. You know, Langford knocked out so many people that was just never caught on film. So You know. All right,
Oh
Rough
yeah,
Rider. Thanks
yeah,
for
right.
tuning in. Thanks everyone for tuning in. My
Yeah,
phone
thanks,
has
Rough
probably got like
Rider.
5 minutes of battery left.
Yeah, thanks, Blake,
Just
as
to give
well.
you a heads
Yeah, I
up.
know we're getting at that time. 2+ hours there, random. Yeah, we can start to wrap it up. I know we got through a lot. Of course, not everything because you can't get through two massive careers like this in a single setting. But we just walk away from it knowing that these are two of the greatest fighters, if not the greatest fighters to ever lace up the gloves. And I think a lot of us in an agreement that yeah, you'd be hard pressed to find two greater fighters than these that we have been discussing here today. A lot of great questions and a lot of great information that have been shared just over the course of this. And random, certainly, this is one where hey, we'll have to broach similar subjects with some of these fighters as well, who are in and around this same type of level and realm of fighter from those eras. You know.
Yeah, man, this is really good. And I think yeah, let's talk in the back about doing the Dixon live stream from his graveside there at Mount Hope, and then
Oh yeah, George
maybe
Dixon.
do that Will's Greb fantasy matchup, because that's a heck of a bout right
Oh
there. We
yeah,
can
we
get
didn't get
into it.
the
We'll
time
we'll
into
save
that
that for
one.
another day.
Yeah, Cirilla's Idealist. We'll get to that one, but yeah, very interesting one right there, Cirilla's Idealist. And yeah, we had a slight chat on it off air there, Random and I. So that'll be an interesting one. We'll definitely do that one. But yeah, thank you, Cirilla's, for all the great questions. Everyone dropping in some great questions, things of that nature. Alex mentioned Usyk gives a credit to the championship, patriot to Ukraine. Yes, sir. I wish my mother and grandparents were allowed to see him win that title. True Kozak. Certainly there, Alex, and salute to you there, buddy. And yeah, you make a great point right there. So Usyk, yeah, true standard for the sport right there for sure. But yeah, we thank everyone for certainly being in attendance here. Random acoustic thoughts. Thank you for taking the time, to drop your knowledge, share your information on the great Sam Langford, Harry Greb, and a host of others who are tied to these two fighters. And they had a number of common opponents. We didn't really get to dive into those as much. So more to
Yeah,
come,
we
folks, for
appreciate it.
sure. In that
And
regard.
sorry to everyone, I didn't have a lot to say about Greb. I'm part of the discipline and focusing on Langford's early career means I can't go research Greb, as I've done just a couple times as a little treat to myself, because it's
Well,
too much, and I don't have nearly as much to say about Greb, but he's one of the finest warrior sportsmen that ever lived.
Oh yeah, you had plenty to say. It's all good. So yeah, we're
That
gonna
was
do this
fun though.
again.
Thanks for having me on, man. Very cool.
Thank you, and salute to everyone. Hey, enjoy the rest of your day, folks. We will be back for sure, and check out Random on Friday. I'll make sure to share it as well. I'm gonna be doing top 10 knockouts with Scrapbook Boxing Librarian. So that'll be one worth checking out for sure there. So salute to everyone who joined in, and we look forward to catching you all on the next.